Hello students, and welcome to the video lecture for Process Plant Safety, Health and Hygiene subject. We are going to start with a new topic of hazard identification and risk assessment today. Before we go on to the topic, let us have a quick recap on what we have studied by far in the subject. We have gone through the introduction to the industrial safety. We came to know how of the different terminologies in industrial safety. We have talked on accidental and loss statistics, how they are being computed. We also touched upon indoor air quality management. We have touched upon fire safety and its prevention. We have also looked at the industrial hygiene and how it has been practiced and done. We have seen different calculations of computing the industrial hygiene. And finally, we also had a look on the different practices in industry, where specifically we looked at LOTO, lockout and tagout, and we also looked at the confined space entry. One of the connecting part now next need is identification of hazards and risk assessment. So the outline with what we are going to do today is we first try to differentiate between the two, one is hazard and another being risk, and then we ask the WH questions to answer what it is like. Why risk assessment? What is it? And how it is being done. There are multiple steps to how the risk assessment is being done, and we'll go stepwise into it. We'll summarize, and then there is a brief assignment for all of you at the end. So to start with, let us differentiate what's a hazard and what is a risk. Now we have done this before as well, but let us make it reiterate the terms. Hazard is something which has potential to cause harm. Now this potential things can be chemicals, can be electricity, it can be any height work, it can be noise, it can be radiation, gases, vapors and so on, which are there as the sources which can cause a harm to the person. And if you look at risk is the probability that what is the chances of this hazard being converting into actually hurting a person, property or an equipment. So we say that there is a cause and an effect relation between hazard and risk. Hazard is a cause, and whatever the effect it is going to do, that is what we have called as risk. Let us differentiate cutting tool. So cutting tool is the cause which can harm, so we call it as a hazard. Grinder is also a hazard. Asphyxiation, so this is the effect because of a hazard, so it's a risk. Loss of hearing, so that's also risk. Death, risk. Pellet of stone, that is also a hazard, it can hurt anyone. Acid spillage, yes, it's also a hazard. Ladder, you can fall from height, so it's a hazard. Fall from height becomes a risk, while ladder, which is the cause, becomes a hazard. Electrocution, so electricity is a source or a cause, and electrocution is a risk. Any debris or rubble will be termed as hazards for tripping or falling. Any wet floor can also be termed as hazard. So that is what we have seen. How do you differentiate as cause, effect and relation to differentiate hazard and risk. So the very next question comes, why do we need a risk assessment? Now it's a right of any worker who is working into an industry to stay safe, right? So it is a right to be protected from any harm which is caused by the failure, and it requires reasonable control measures. So we need to assess this risk and probable harm that can be caused not only to a person or employees of the industry but any of a labor who are working there on contract as well. When you are working in a lab, that also becomes a need for risk assessment for safety of students. Risk assessment is also required so that we know the hazardous situations and the reasons for hazards very clearly so that we can eliminate and make our workplace pretty much safe. It is also required as a set guidelines to what you should and you should not do so that your workplace remains safe. Risk assessment study is one of the requirement as per safety protocols of an industry as well. It is worth to know what it is. A risk assessment is carefully examination of your workplace to find out what can harm to the people, what extent it can harm my people, and if at all it is going to harm, what precaution should I take, or rather what should I do to prevent it. So there are 5 steps in which this risk assessment study has to be done. The very first step is to identify the hazards. Second step goes on to deciding what might be harmed and how. So this is going a step ahead to find out the reasons behind the hazards. And then we have to evaluate or rate that hazards and evaluate our risk and decide on to the precautions. All these steps has to be recorded carefully and then it has to be implemented. So this all record keeping has to be done, and many a times it is possible that there are changes debottlenecking into the plants at different stages. So this risk assessment study has to be evaluated and updated every year. So we call review your assessment and update if at all it is necessary. So let's go step by step, but before that we will try to see some of the situations where you can have this. So we go step by steps. So our step 1 is to identify the hazards. So very evident on how to identify is take a round. That's called the audit. So typically a safety audit and an environment audit, people from an HSS department will take a round to your workplace along with your in charge and they will take a look. Maybe by their previous experiences they'll be able to tell, and collectively they'll come out what can cause a harm. If this is not the case, the employees who are working in that vicinity of a workplace can tell you what exactly can cause hazards apart from their routine job. If these are very regular sections like dispatch section or any kind of transportation area, then and these sections or gas filling sections, packaging sections, these are very well known sections and the hazards in this area are very well documented. So you can visit to the HSE websites, trade association notifications, different magazines to gather the knowledge to identify the hazards in the very known areas. Along with this, if you can go through the data sheets which are being provided by the manufacturers or the equipment dealers, they can tell you because they would have done a back study while doing the same. Also, if you're new to the plant, you can go through the records of the accidents in the past that can tell you what exactly would have gone wrong and has caused. So that becomes our very first step of identifying the hazards. Step 2 is who might be harmed. So this does not mean that you have to identify individual person, but rather it should be a collective group of people, like the operator will be harmed, or rather a person who is working on contract labor in that area will be harmed, or a person, any site visitors may be harmed, or the complete plant operation as a whole can be harmed. So whether it is a community, a group of people, a very specific people who are working in the area who are going to be harmed, this has to be noted. And each hazard will have a different implication. So you have to find out very specifically if something happens wrong, what are those set of people who is going to be harmed. As far as to evaluate the risk and decide the precautions, now you have evaluated this hazard. You have been able to decide that what hazards are there and how it is going to harm, whom it is going to harm. So very first thing is, if you talk about an evaluation of a risk is to look at its control measures. Whether it is a very high risk, whether it is a very low risk, whether it is a medium risk. If at all it is there, what should be done? So the very first question that you ask yourself is, can I get rid of this? If not, what are the precautions that I have to take? So, if there are no way to eliminate these hazards, then there are precautionary measures that you have to take. So what we will do is try and carry out the same thing with lesser risk activities. We try to prevent to that hazard. We'll organize work to reduce exposure to that hazard. If certain people are going to get exposed, and we'll try that they will not go there. And the last line of protection is personal protective equipment to be issued for the people who are working there. Step 4 is record and implementation. So once you have results recovered from the risk assessment, that is a rating you have to do on all the hazards and the risk. So you have to give a certain amplitude, you have to give a certain probability of what could be done. Once the result of the risk assessment, all staff within the laboratory should be informed. When I say laboratory, it's the workplace I'm taking as an example. So while writing out this risk assessment results, it should be pretty simple and understandable to everyone, that which is higher risk, which is lower risk, and so on. The risk assessment not always has to be perfect, but it needs to show that an inspection has been carried out correctly and you are taking precautionary measures to bring down the risk to the minimum. Moving on to the last step, review your findings. Now, it's not always possible that your company keeps on debottlenecking or having changes into the plants. But newer equipment, substances, procedures may find their place which may lead to newer results, and it needs to be reviewed. As far as looking at your risk assessment, again, will be a good advice. So, whatever you have learned from your past, looking at the newer procedure, you have to review the complete thing. That means you have to relook at the hazards, what it can harm, what new it has been done. You have to again come back to evaluate the risk You have to record it so that it becomes up to date. So these were the 5 steps which we have gone through for the risk assessment. Let us go through some of the other part of it. Can you identify the hazard and the risk, what it can be in this? These all are the laborers who are working on some of our rotating equipment, sharpening some of the metal pieces. If you can carefully look at, these are no PPEs, no goggles, bare hands, and the area doesn't look good. So the hazard is either they can get caught into the rotating wheel. There is no protection here. There is no guard as well, which can protect any kind of sparks which can come up to them. These are all the hazards. So the risk is their eye can get damaged, their hands can get caught, there can be severe burns. Even this rotating equipment can be caught. So that is damage to the body part. So I have multiple pictures which I would wish you to go through and have an insight on what could go, what is a hazard and what is a risk. You see again, although he is having a shield, it's a very tricky thing. He don't have any gloves. He have a spark here. There is spilled material. This will be a very good study to work on, where you have working in a warehouse. What would be the hazards and the risk? So stacking of the things, hydraulic failures. But that's a good practice. You see people are wearing shoes. There are specific route symbols that have been given. There are designated places for things to be kept. These are not piled too high. But yes, you have to look for what can be the hazard and what can be the risk. Yeah. If you look at this picture, planks, not a good sign. Scaffolding, a better one, with a harness. No helmets, no proper attire. Big hazards, risk, fatality. Lot of cables, welding is going on. People in the vicinity are not up to the mark to what he has to be. Lot of electrocutions because seem to be metal pieces. Boom. This can be a very dangerous situation where he is welding in the vicinity of gas cylinders. Another welder who is not bothered whether the spark are going to go to. Again, I don't see any of a shield here that are hazards. So yes, this can damage to his own eye. There can be a fire risk. So I looked at different examples on how the hazard and risk can be in different situations. These are all hazardous situations that we have seen and different risks which can be possible. The elements which are exposed are typically 4 when we talk occupational health and safety. It is people, that is number 1. Next will be equipment, material, and yes, it is environment. We further divide these elements specifically to people, equipment, and property. We call this occupational health, occupational safety, equipment damage, and property damage. Now, when I say something is occupational health, it is all about the conditions or the factors that are going to affect the well-being of my people working. Important is it has to be during the working hours in a working environment. It does not always mean to be a physical health, but it also means to be a mental health. So that Any other factors, even like drinking water, dust, fumes, or the washrooms, are also considered very seriously for the well-being of my workers. Now, when I talk about occupational safety, it basically deals with controlling of the accidental loss. Accidental loss, which is happening during the work hours. So we have looked at the loss statistics extensively when we started the subject. When we talk of occupational safety, it is more deal with illness, that is occupational health, and injury when we talk of occupational safety. Apart from these occupational health and occupational safety, we should also look at the properties and equipment equally. We'll look at how we are going to rate all of this. Before we go ahead, let us remember risk is probability of occurrence and magnitude of its consequence. So we are looking at two things on which it is being rated. One is how probable it is to happen, and what is the magnitude with which it is going to affect us. On these two scales, we are going to rate our occupational health, occupational safety, property damage, and equipment damage. So, rating scale goes, this is the impact that we call magnitude. So, I say that the impact is very, very high when it is health. When you talk of health, if it is fatality. So, if the illness is leading to a permanent damage to the body organ, that means loss of hearing, chronic diseases, anything, then I call that impact is very, very high. So magnitude becomes very high. If at all the person can be treated, if there is a fracture, then I call the medical treatment illness. If he trips down, if he has some bruises or something, if treatment is possible, then we have impact low. And if medical aid illness, that means if a first aid can be given and it is possible to down, it's a low rating. When I say probability of the occupational health, if it is a repetitive event, that is, it happens every year multiple times, then I call it to be a very high rating. If it happens infrequent, that is once in some years, then it is medium. And if it is very low, if it happens once in a decade or so. So we will look at two things. We will look at the impact rating and we will look at the probability rating for occupational health. Let's go on to occupational safety. When safety means if there is a disabling injury or fatality, it's a high rating. Again, medical aid injury, it's a medium. And if it is okay with first aid, we call it low. If it happens very frequent, once in every 3 months, such safety things has a very high rating. Once in a year or so, it's medium. If it's not happening in a year round, it's a low. If you look at we have looked at the occupational safety. Now we go for rating scale of equipment damage. So if a loss of a function of a facility is there for more than 4 hours, and if it costs roughly around more than 2 lakhs, if they could be damaged, the repair requires 2 lakhs, then we call it as a high rating. If it is less than 2 lakhs, roughly 50,000 or something, and it can be repaired quickly within 1 to 4 hours, it's a medium damage. And we call low rating if it can be facility up to 1 hour, it is broken and you can repair very quickly. The probability if it is happening once a year or more, then it is high. Once in 3 years, it's medium, and very less frequent. Same way we have it for material. If there is a loss of material, complete damage, or if it ruins of material which cost more than 10 lakh is high impact. If you have a material loss between 1 to 2, it's medium, and if it's less than a lakh, it's because the raw material cost is huge factor. That's why this numbers. And then we have a rating for the material. At least once per year, we call it high. Maybe we happening occasionally in 3 years. Is medium, and happens more than 3 years, then we call it low. Now there are multiple ratings for all of those. We make a matrix. We call rating scale of impact versus the probability. So if both are low, then we give 1. Both are, one is medium and then is low, it makes 1. Either way. But if impact is low but probability high, then it becomes 2. But when probability is low but impact is very high, because that can cause fatalities and long-term damage, so 3. Either way, when it is medium and high on both the sides, you will have a rating of 3. And if it is both high, it's 4. What does that mean to us? 4 means it is a completely unacceptable risk level. Actions has to be required to eliminate this. To reduce this risk level immediately, you cannot go ahead. When we talk of 3, these are the very high risk zone, extensive action to be taken for control. When I say extreme risk, it has to be dealt very seriously so that we can eliminate. When we talk of high risk, we need to look at the eliminating options, but yes, control can be possible. When it is moderate risk, we have to look for the appropriate control, and when there are low risk, control, if at all, can be justified. So that sums up our story on how we do a risk assessment, looking at a hazard, looking at such impact and probability, and rating on a scale to see what it can be done. So the whole process of this hazard identification and risk assessment control goes in 3 ways. One is normal operating condition, when it is abnormal operating conditions, and when there is emergency conditions. We'll go on to the details of SOT analysis. That's an operability study. That is where we look at these 3 in further detail. For now, we just focus on to the risk assessment final part, that is control of OH&S as a risk. That has 3 different parts. One is termination, treatment, and tolerance. So when you are in a part 4 or 3 rating scale, that is where we're looking for termination. When I say termination, we have to take actions such that that risk cease to exist. Usually there are specific actions that can be completed so that there is complete termination of the risk. So we have seen people who are working at height. If you give up providing a platform instead of ladders, this can terminate, right? So work at height are very permanent kind of platforms rather than a regular insignificant kind of arrangements. That is where we go for terminations. When I say treatment, improvement in the performance can be achieved through the treatment. So examples are providing a bund wall. So when you are having a certain tank and you expect that there can be a certain spillage or trippage from those tanks, then if you provide a bund wall, whatever the spillage are there, that will remain into those walls. And that is what happens when you are having acid loading or a dispatch section or a typical utility sections. You can find these walls. So we call treatment, so that within that periphery you are able to protect it. Finally, tolerance. Some of the activities you cannot actually leave it. It has to be go ahead with the same case as it has to be. So you do not permit undertaking improvement management So immediately in such cases, you have to carry out this in the way it is. So when there is a tolerance, there is something last level of protection, that is personal protective equipments, which you have to follow. So we have our 3 levels of control. So that is what we have learned in our extensive lecture on SOT identification and risk analysis. We've seen that it's a legal requirement for all workplaces. There are 5 steps to it. How to identify a hazard, decide who can be harmed, evaluating a risk record, keeping of those things, reviewing it, revising it, and updating as and required. We also looked at how do we rate the hazards and evaluating those risks on different scales. At the end, a risk assessment is a mean to an end of the hazards. It is not an end in itself. The aim is to keep people safe. And it is not only a study, but it is more into an implementation part. Hope you all had good exercise on this. All of you have been to an industrial training, so I wish you can recall your workplace, which industry you have been working on. Think of you are in one of a section of a plant where you have spent a substantial time of maybe 15 or 20 days or more. Look at the 5 steps of the risk assessment, identifying the hazards. Think of it, what was the exercises going on. Sorry. Look at the 5 steps of risk assessment, identify the hazards. Look at who are the people who are going to get harmed and complete the risk assessment procedure. We know the ratings, how we can rate those. So do the rate activities, consider all the 4: occupational hazard, occupational safety, property damage and material damage. Make a brief report giving details of your workplace, what activities you are considering, scenario of those hazards, and your risk assessment analysis. You can submit your exercise on Google Classroom to me. I hope you all had a good thorough review on how the hazard identification risk assessment has been done. Thanks for your patient listening. I'll be happy to answer your queries. You can drop down to my email ID or you can drop down in the comment box. Thank you.